So hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. Thank you so much for coming today. This is our new season of Science by the Slice. For those of you who are new, we've been doing this series for a couple of decades now through different locations, and we're excited to be here for this year. I'm Fenella Saunders. I'm the editor-in-chief of American Scientist magazine. These talks are put on as a collaboration between American Scientists, the RTP chapter of Sigma Xi, Science Communicators of North Carolina, and we also get funding from the NC Biotechnology Center. So we thank all of our collaborators from the students going. We do these talks generally the first Thursday of the month. There was a conflict for last week, so we ended up doing it today. I will say that I was a little nervous about doing it today because it is 9/11. I do want to acknowledge that today is a day of remembrance. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in New York. I knew people who died in the World Trade Center. So it's a lot, but I think the best way to honor people is to include them in our space as we continue to grow. So I'd like to ask you all to just, keep people in mind who are gone as we go through our day. So thank you guys very much for being here today. So I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Rohan Shirwaiker. He is the James T. Ryan Distinguished Professor in Industrial and Systems Engineering and co-director of the Bezos Center for Sustainable Protein at NC State University. He's going to talk to us today about the future of protein in an evolving food system. So thank you very much for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me. Very excited to share with you some ideas, some facts, and just have some discussion around our food system and really the need to strengthen it in the coming years. So this talk, we are going to do some time travel. We might go back a decade, we might go back a century, then move forward by a few decades. So we'll go back and forth. And I'm trying to make this less technical and more fun, but at the end, I'm very happy to take any questions and certainly have offline discussions if anybody is more interested in this. And I think this topic is very apt while all of you are enjoying some animal proteins.
Some are vegetarian. So.
Some are vegetarian, but there is cheese on this.
Cheese, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's actually start by going back a little bit. Okay. So this year is 2013. It's the first week of August. I was a relatively new professor then. I was getting ready for my fall classes. And on a first Friday of that month, I just checked the science website. And this was what the headline was. It comes to $375,000 burger. On Monday, this burger was unveiled at an event, and there were a lot of news articles. And so, I don't know how many of you had seen these back in 2013 August, but my first reactions were real bad. Few different things, right? First, of course, $375,000 for a burger. And of course, test tube meat, lab-grown burger, Frankenburger, like those were literally the terms that were used there. And why? Like why? Right? We have such a beautiful food system. We have access to so many diverse foods. Why? And then, I read a little bit about this is Dr. Mark Post, our colleague at Maastricht University. He was the one who was behind that burger technology. And so, as I was just reading about some of this, again, being in the South, my reaction was bless his heart. Why is he doing this? And so as I started digging a little deeper, I realized that he was not the crazy one. The craziness maybe began a century ago. So now let's go back to 1931. It's December, crisp weather. Back then, we didn't have internet. And I assume most of us were not born yet. For some of us, our parents were not born. So this is true time travel. So during December, this magazine was published, and Winston Churchill, who was a politician still, but not a prime minister yet, not knighted yet, He wrote an article in a magazine, Strand magazine, called 50 Years Hence. And this was a very fictional, science fiction kind of article. And he talked about this idea of the absurdity of growing a whole chicken when we can just make parts of it to eat. Right? And that was 1931. It didn't happen 50 years hence, but certainly in 2013, there was some demonstration of it. And even back then, right, in 2013, when I read this and sort of I started looking at this, I still hadn't appreciated why we need this. Is this just crazy ideas, or there is some really method behind this madness, so to speak? And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, because this is a realization I had over years. And now I'm very deeply in advancing this. So why do we eat meat, right? Among other reasons, humans, the primary reason we eat meat is for the proteins. Meats are very dense in protein. Protein is one of the most ingredients that we need for various functions. And it's recommended that anywhere from 10 to 30% of daily calories come from contain protein. And it varies by age, gender, and other factors. So while the proportion is smaller, the role it plays in the human body is extremely important. And meat is not the only source of protein, of course, right? There's plant-based sources as well. If you look at the global trends, right, more so in the Western countries, our primary source of protein is animal products, including meat. But if you look at Africa, Asia, that's not necessarily the case today. However, I refer to these as trends because this is just a snapshot in time. This is a snapshot from 2023. Overall, if you look globally, the consumption of animal protein continues to increase. So this is a graph from 1961 to 2022. And you can see globally how the consumption of animal protein has, and particularly meat, has increased over time. There's a lot of reasons for this, including socioeconomic reasons. And so as populations become wealthier, eating meat, animal proteins is also in some cultures a sign of wealth. So it's common to see that this consumption increases, and this trend is going to continue over time. If you look at the projections for the next 25 years, so now we will move forward by a couple of decades, where the global population is estimated to peak at around 10 billion, we are going to need about 52% more animal protein globally. Right? That's a staggering number in just two decades. And we need to start thinking about this now, because there are going to be key challenges, whether we like it or not. There are going to be key challenges in meeting this nutrition of our population. I'll give you just a couple of examples. There's really a lot of reasoning behind why we need to think through. First, if you think of livestock production, today it uses 70% of agricultural land. If we are going to need more animal protein coming from traditional livestock production, we are going to need 1.5 more times land. Land is a finite resource, right? So that is something we need to think about. We absolutely need to think about greenhouse gas emissions that come from different parts of our food system, animals being one of the sources, livestock production being one of the sources. Truthfully, this is not a political issue. This is the reality. There are scientific studies that have mapped this out. And so if you look at these, but a variety of other challenges, we absolutely need to start thinking about what the future of our food is going to look like. And we cannot wait till 2050 to start solving the problem. We need to start today. In fact, we needed to start a decade or two. And certainly that just one small example from 2013 was a signal towards starting the transition. And so if you look into this crystal ball and how we want to solve it, we really need a diverse approach to strengthening our food system, right? There's an image I generated from Microsoft Designer. I just asked Microsoft Designer to generate an image that tells our audience about what the future may look like from my perspective in a couple of decades. And so the idea here, I think, as many of us envision, is we have a future where we still have agriculture, right? Agriculture as we know it is not going to go away. Humans are still going to continue to eat meat as well as other plants in the way that we do. Just the thing is, we cannot grow it at the same rate with resources. And so we really need to think of complementarities where to really add to our food system to diversify it. We also need to think of other ways where science and technology can help us make equally good or better alternatives. And I really look at this, we should really think of this as a circular system. These are not if or, right? While we continue to improve agriculture as we know it and make it more sustainable, there are going to be inputs that feed into sustainable proteins, as well as outputs, side streams that come from some of these new products that go back into agriculture. And so now if we go back and think about these gentlemen, they actually had something valid in mind. With Winston Churchill, the whole idea was he was talking about how science is going to help us make our systems in general more efficient. Food was just one example in that essay. This whole idea was we're making so much progress in science and technology that we may be able to really address some of the inefficiencies in current system, this particular example being in the food system. And Mark Post was really thinking about the same thing when he was doing very basic lab-based research on how do we grow meat using cells of animals without having to grow a full animal. And so as we think through these technologies, right, there's a variety of ways the science and technology is going to be driving this and connecting agriculture as we know it and these new alternatives. There's going to be inputs coming from plants and crops, not just the ones that we grow today for feed, but also new generation of crops. Cells coming from animals or coming from other sources, including microbes from the air. There are companies out that are actually filtering air, taking out some microbes and using that as a form of protein. We certainly need CO2 that might be generated, as well as other gases from the environment, and leverage these to make other alternatives which are nutritious. At the same time, there might be side streams coming from these that we can leverage as inputs in agriculture as well. So there's a lot that needs to be done for this to happen, but there's definitely potential. We have the basic science and technology. We really need more investment of time, resources, effort to really make this a reality. And so this whole idea is where you take these inputs, you can take one or more of plant-based ingredients, cells, some of the gases and other inputs from the environment, and through biomanufacturing technologies, process them in foods and do a few things. It's very important that these foods are tasty, but you can also, using the technology correctly, modify these foods, alter these foods in a way that they could be more nutritious than the current alternatives that we have. And it can really be a win-win. So these type of new novel food technologies that I'm talking about, these are often referred to in the field as alternative proteins. I prefer to call them as sustainable proteins. Because these are not really alternatives, these are just one among many that are equally good. So there's three main categories here. There's cell cultivated, there's plant-based, there's fermentation made. And I'll briefly tell you about each. So plant-based proteins, right? I'm sure all of you have had, at some point at least, an Impossible Burger or a Beyond Burger. And those are examples of these plant-based meats. And what's different? Why do we need it? This question often comes up. So if you look at the density of protein in meat versus, let's say, chickpeas, meat, if you essentially look at the ratio of calories to protein is very high. It's not the same case in many plant-based sources. To get the same amount of protein, you will have to eat so many chickpeas that you're also now getting more carbohydrates and other things, maybe exceeding your daily limit. But also animal protein typically is called complete protein because it has all the essential amino acids that our body needs. Not all plant-based sources have that. Some do, but not all. And so there is strong reasoning for technologies where you can extract protein out of plant-based sources and then make a product that is dense in protein, but by mixing the right combinations of ingredients, you can also make sure you're getting all the essential amino acids that I referred to. And so the product would end up being equally nutritious as meat if you do it correctly. And again, taste is very important in this as well. So that's sort of the idea and rationale behind plant-based alternative proteins or sustainable proteins. The cell-cultivated ones, these are the ones that garner a lot of attention from media, and there's also some misinformation around them. So hence I wanted to clarify how these work. The idea is you can take cells out of a cow or a chicken, and you don't need to sacrifice the animal. All you need is a small piece of biopsy, and you can take cells out of it and under the right conditions, grow them. Eventually, get these cells to grow and form meat. Oftentimes, these cell-cultivated products that we talk about, it's actually not just the cellular biomass. We often mix them with plant-based ingredients too, and really to get that right mix of nutrition, texture, taste, and also to be able to bring that price. In fact, some of the products, very few products have been globally approved so far and on the market. And the amount of animal cellular biomass in there is anywhere from 3% to 50%. The rest of it is actually plant-based ingredients. We don't realize it when only use the term cell cultivated, but that's the reality. So there's really hybrid or blended products that way. We can make products that are close to 100% animal cells, but technology has not yet evolved to be able to make them at price parity to traditional meat. That $375,000, some of it is coming if we were to try to make these out of just pure cells, and that to the cost has come down. And then there's fermentation meat products, and there's a variety of fermentation technologies that can be used. When primarily we talk from a sustainable protein perspective, we typically are not talking about the technology that we use, for example, to make kombucha tea. That's a different type of fermentation. One of the methods we talk about is what's called precision fermentation, and believe it or not, it's the same method that is used to make insulin today, where we use microbe cells to produce whatever that target of interest is. In the food context, we are talking about using the right microbes, yeast, fungi, or bacteria even, to create protein that is of interest to food instead of insulin, which we need for medical technology. So some of like the base concepts and base technologies are still the same that we are already using in healthcare. There's other forms there where there are species of bacteria, fungus, yeast even that are edible. And it's very easy relatively in the scheme of things to grow some of these microorganisms compared to animal cells to make cultivated meat. And so by getting the right host and to grow them, and again, mixing with the right ingredients, we are able to create products that taste, feel like meat, but are not made directly from animal cells and still have the right nutrition that our body needs. So those are sort of the three base technologies. And there's also, before this talk started, we were talking about bugs and insects. And they will be a part of our food system, especially in the US, but decades out. Today, bugs are already a part of food systems around the world. In the US, that is a few years away, few decades away, let's say. So these three are really the ones that are going to take off, and we need to address some of the key challenges that exist. Yes.
Sorry, I just, while we're on this slide, I had a colleague at Duke who studied molybdenum deficiency. And I always wondered, where do we even get that? So as you're talking about these artificial creation methods, what sorts of minerals that might be in trace amounts do you have to worry about adding in?
You are absolutely right. I think this gives us an opportunity to customize the products and nutrition, right? So the meat that we eat today, for example, it has evolved over centuries and centuries, right? And it's not necessarily the most efficient still that evolution has brought us. Now we have an opportunity to really customize things and address some of the deficiencies. Or, even think about this where, if there are people who have meat allergy. They may have eaten meat when they were kids and loved it, but they can't eat meat anymore. Now you have an ability when you take the cells to alter the cells in a way that is not harmful to the body in other ways, but really alter the genes that may cause these issues with meat. And so people who typically cannot eat traditional meat may be able to eat and enjoy some of these products as well. So your point is very well taken. I think there's a lot of added advantages instead of simply trying to replace what we currently eat. So now let's switch gears just a little bit and let's put on our hat as consumers of food. Just people, right? All of us are consumers. And so if you think of science and technology, many of you are scientists or communicators, that is one thing. But if you think from a consumer perspective, our brains work differently. And some of us are scientists as well as consumers, but something switches, right? So I'm sure many of us, the reason you are here is you like science and technology. I used to say all of us care about the environment. That may or may not be true. So I like to say most of us, because I do think that is true. And then some of us definitely live to eat instead of eat to live. I love food. I love to enjoy a variety of foods. And I'm sure there are others in the room and on the Zoom call like that. So that's the reality when we talk about food. But connecting this back to what I said earlier, right? That article, for example, there's so many things here that science-wise I'm excited, but then you read just some of those things in the headline, and as a consumer, I'm absolutely not. And so think about what drives our food choices in reality on a day-to-day basis, even if we are scientists, whatever our profession is. Any guess across the food system what the first driver is for consumers when they pick any food item in a grocery store? Cost, the price of food. Number 2, 3, 4, any general ideas?
Packaging.
Taste.
Taste is number 2. Price and taste.
Shelf height.
No, that is actually true. So convenience, as we call it, right? Literally, if something is placed here versus here where you don't even see it, you're not going to buy it. Yeah, and that is absolutely true. And that goes back to where grocery stores even place things, right? If they put it in some corner somewhere where you don't even see it, you're not going to buy it or even it exists. So that whole convenience piece is in fact very, very important in consumer surveys. Any ideas what the fourth may be? Nutrition, the health, nutrition, and we may think it's probably first and foremost, it is not, it's fourth. Environment and sustainability doesn't come anywhere in the top 4 or 5. We all care about it, but unless it's cheap, it's tasty, it's accessible, we are really not going to have it. That's the truth. And so those are the things we need to think about, but those are sort of not the only things I think we need to think about, right? When we talk about food, food is very cultural. There is religious influence, there is the geography has an influence. So there is a lot of factors. So on one hand, as scientists, we think about just the basic technology to make this work. But food, I think, is very unique, where me personally, as an engineer, I'm a manufacturing engineer by training, and I've worked with metals and plastics a lot in my career as well. And I have to switch things because, yes, even if I can make things and sort of demonstrate how things work in the lab, unless we are able to address the price, taste, convenience, nutrition to begin with, and also account for all of these factors which vary from market to market, we are not going to address that problems, the challenges that were talked about earlier about strengthening our food system. And so that is where really a lot more work is needed. So making this connection for alternative proteins is actually today still a big gap, where technologies have been demonstrated. Then But for some of them, they haven't reached price parity with traditional food. We have certainly brought down the cost by orders of magnitude. Today, we can make some of these meats an order of magnitude cheaper instead of, or multiple orders instead of 300 plus thousand. We can make something cheaper than $15 a pound, for example. So there's definitely been advances. However, $15 a pound is still twice as expensive as other meat. And so there's still a lot more work needed.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, yes. I mean, this day and age, you're absolutely right. And so there are some drivers there. Taste is very important. Again, unless we can create something that is tasty, the convenience piece is really, I think I look at it as a more societal piece as well, where we need to think of all stakeholders in our system, including retail stores and having that understanding. Everybody has a role to play. Nutrition piece, of course, there's a lot needs to be done. The safety aspects of this are important because they influence regulations, which eventually influence bringing products to market. In some of this, I think the responsible innovation part is extremely important. I mentioned the importance of considering all stakeholders. Oftentimes, we think of the value chain between that ingredient or that raw material. Let's say we have this grain. Now, how do we process it up to packaging? But think about our farmers who are actually going to make those raw materials. There are some concerns about whether these technologies might put farmers out of jobs. That's really unlikely to happen because majority of the ingredients we need here actually do come from farms. If anything, these technologies will provide some economic development opportunities and some additional revenue streams to our farmers as well. That education of the community still needs to happen. Oftentimes, the focus is very narrowly on science and fictional part and not on some of the realities and what needs to happen. So that is exactly where the Bezos Center for Sustainable Protein at NC State came about. And it's one piece of trying to solve the puzzle. So Bezos Earth Fund, it is Jeff Bezos' philanthropy, so it's not directly affiliated with Amazon or any of his other endeavors. And the Bezos Earth Fund has committed is a significant amount. Jeff Bezos has committed a significant amount of money in this decade to addressing nature and climate challenges. And so they're investing in a variety of things, including how do we make our current farming systems more sustainable, more efficient. But complementary to that, they also want to look at how we can make these novel foods more efficiently. In most fields, as you may know, in most novel emerging fields, the basic work typically happens at universities, like the science is developed, the technology, eventually that leads to startups and companies, and that's how things go. This field has been unique where almost everything has been done by startups and very little federal funding even has gone into the basic research. What that means is when private companies and startups are trying to do their own research, what happens is the problems are shared across the field because a basic science and technology hasn't been addressed, but the solutions are not being shared. So it's a very inefficient model where every company is using their VC's money in theory to solve the same problem. And so that is why it is very important that there be public investments in open access research and technology development that can eventually drive the industry. And so that's where this comes in. So there was a global competition that was done a couple of years ago. It was done in summer 23. And they had done the background research and they invited 14 universities around the world to develop ideas to establish a center of excellence. And NC State was one of, I think, 5 institutions in the US that they invited. And they invited very particular people they knew in these institutions that were working on these problems. So we had that honor of being invited. And North Carolina, I think, is a great place to be doing this work because we're still an agricultural state. It's still an important part of our economy. We are in RTP right now, right? Biotechnology is so important to this region. Manufacturing is so important. And at NC State, we really do have a confluence of all this. And so we were able to put together a very nice proposal and ideas that we developed in collaboration with industry, local and international. And it went through the standard peer review processes, and eventually we were selected to be the first Bezos Center in the world on this topic, and the only one in the US. Subsequently, they funded one in Europe, which is at Imperial College London, and one in Asia, National University of Singapore. So there are 3 Bezos Centers in the world. The broader mission is still the same, to advance those technologies, novel food technologies for sustainable proteins to strengthen our food system. However, each center, right, I talked about the importance of geography culture. So being in 3 continents, the challenges are different, the audiences are different, the regulations are different, for example. And also these 3 institutions have different strengths. So at NC State, we are very much about biomanufacturing. We think about how we can build production systems as opposed to making things in the lab. So that's where we were having a conversation earlier. While the media uses the term lab-grown meat for a lot of these things, that's not the reality. We are talking about making these in factories like breweries. Literally, we have tanks exactly like what breweries might have. So we are talking about production facilities, factories. We are really not talking about lab-grown stuff anymore. So we are very much about biomanufacturing. Imperial College is very much about synthetic biology-driven approaches. University of Singapore, they are very much about microalgae-driven proteins and product formulation. And the 3 of us actually work as a global network to really exchange best practices, see where the synergies are, and make progress. So sort of this is how the Bezos Center is set up. We do focus on science and technology gaps, policy needs, industry needs, certainly look at customers. Unlike some academic centers which are purely research focused, where the goal might be to have research papers published out of it, that is important to us, but that is not the only metric. We are very much interested in creating technologies that we can translate to the industry. We are very much about workforce development, right from K-12 through to retraining of current professionals who might be in a different industry, but might be looking for other career opportunities, and really everything in between. As well as community engagement is very important. And why I'm here is even a part of that, really educating our colleagues, our peers, our communities about these technologies. And we try to work closely with all key stakeholders, including farmers, commodity groups, policymakers, regulators, nationally and internationally. Our research from a more technical perspective, we look at it sort of in this house form, where there's research around new materials that are needed to make these technologies. It could be new sources of plants or crops, which we currently haven't thought about, but they do have good protein. And now we need to figure out how we can extract that protein and make nutritious products out of it. We have projects around new manufacturing processes. Again, a lot of the cost, the price really comes from the whole manufacturing of it. And so we think quite a lot about how we can improve current processes or develop new processes. Because I mentioned earlier that some of these technologies we adopt from medicine are very similar to medicine. However, you can imagine that in medicine, the costs are orders of magnitude higher, and that's okay in healthcare. Well, it may not be okay in healthcare, but that's the reality. In food, those technologies, we cannot simply translate them and use them as is. So there's work around that. And then certainly the larger systemic issues. So we think of sustainability analysis, the life cycle analysis of these new technologies as they're developed, for example. Because at the end of the day, if we do this analysis and realize that the environmental footprint is still the same, then why are we doing this? So it's very important to continuously evaluate and make sure we are making that positive impact that we set out to do. We think about the supply chains of things, because in reality, in industry, things don't happen in isolation. Everything is connected. So we have to look at the value chain and the larger supply chain. We do things such as sensory studies. I mentioned the importance of consumers, of course. We do studies to understand consumers' inputs, and that can help make better products. And so there's really, we have a strong agenda around research, but also workforce development and community engagement there. What I'm really proud of in our center is the interdisciplinary team science approach. What I mean by that is any single project or activity that we do in the center, there is at least two people involved. Oftentimes there's teams of 3 to 5 to 6 people which may be a combination of a chemical engineer, an industrial engineer, a food scientist. We also have people with policy background. We have people with education and pedagogy background. So it's really a very diverse team of researchers and the students in our center that work, whether it be undergraduate students who are participating, graduate or postdocs. They are also being co-advised. So this is not a typical model you see in universities. Typically, you might be aware of faculty having their own labs, which faculty still do, and they do their own work. But in this case, we actually have put together, for a very good strategic reason, people who are approaching the problem from different angles, and the students are co-mentored by them, and that helps build a workforce and helps students think just outside their niche domain. So there's a lot of things going on in there. We started only a year ago, but I'm very proud of the progress we have slowly and steadily made over 1 year, and we continue to grow. And so in the future, you will see more about the outcomes and impacts that the Bezos Center is making. Just the last thing I wanted to add before stopping and taking questions, if any, was we are very much about trying to leverage the strengths in North Carolina, across NC State even. So while NC State leads the center, we have partners like Duke University, UNC Pembroke, NC A&T, as well as Forsyth Tech Community College, as well as several industry partners that include some regional startups to some Fortune 500 companies. So we are all about partnerships, all about collaborations where there is the right value on both sides, the right synergy. At NC State, for example, we leverage the expertise we have at our biomanufacturing training and education center, which is primarily focused on the biopharma. But as I alluded to earlier, a lot of the fundamentals might be very relevant to food. There is the NC Food Innovation Lab at the North Carolina Research Campus in Kannapolis, which is a pilot food production facility that typically works with entrepreneurs and companies to product formulation and pilot runs. But they have some nice capabilities. We have the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, which has some really strong programs around sustainable agriculture, which serves as an input to the technologies I'm talking about. Even we have at NC State Institute called the Comparative Medicine Institute. Part of what they do is look at tissue engineering research, which is about really printing or making organs that go into replacement. That's actually my original area of research. I still work in the medical field looking at replacement organs. But a lot of those technologies are also relevant in food. And so we absolutely try to leverage whatever strengths exist, whether it be in research, whether it be in educational programs, or the networks that some of these groups have. So I'll stop there. Very happy to take any questions. Right now, the center is co-directed by me and my colleague, Dr. Bill Amutis. We are the yin and yang because he came from 40 years of food industry experience, while I'm a through and through academic. He's a protein chemist, I'm a manufacturing engineer. So we look at things very differently, but really that helps the center move forward. This was when we visited the USDA to talk about some of our research and programs last year. So again, thank you for your time and attention, and happy.
So you know how there's a lot of information now about ultra processed foods.
Yes.
And how we should avoid those. And obviously you've got to develop these products to be tasty enough that people will actually want to eat them. So how are those things going to be balanced?
So here is the thing. I think right now, ultra processing is actually not very well defined, or today in the popular media and how the discussions are happening, we are trying to equate ultra processed to unhealthy. And those are actually not true. Yes, some or many ultra processed foods are unhealthy, but not everything that is ultra processed is bad, right? With some very simple processes, even to sterilize something to make it better and get devoid of microorganisms, might be considered ultra processed. And so I think some of it is really taking a step back. And I know the community, the food community in general, is now looking at the whole ultra processed thing. Started with a paper and a classification several years ago, but we recognized that that classification was a good starting point, but it certainly wasn't what should exist today. And so there's new work to be done. Long story short, things can be ultra processed. We can minimize the processing, certainly, but they can still be healthy and nutritious for you.
And tasty.
And tasty, certainly.
The impossible meats haven't necessarily been good for kind of playing into that because they get a lot of flack for being high fat and high salt. And that's your trade-off between being tasty and palatable, right?
Correct. And so this is again, so I've recognized over the last few years as I work on this, the human psyche is so interesting and plays such a big role. We all want it to be nutritious, but you're absolutely right. What makes meat tasty is really the fat within it. If you take out the fat, it is more nutritious, but hardly anybody wants to eat it. And so there is that right balance that you need to achieve. So many of these companies are, in fact, looking at and doing research around what is the maximum content of fat you need to put so that it's still tasty, but the fat is still not as high as maybe some other foods that we eat. And so it's always going to be about compromise. And certainly in the US, at the end of the day, hopefully it's all about consumer choice, right? We can create options, we can educate consumers. At the end of the day, consumers need to really think through what's beneficial for them.
That's very, very interesting topic. It's like fascinating because I have a couple of questions related. One is more of the commercial side, more why we do this. And you show like we're gonna have world population with protein need, with sources, environmental pressure, protein, animal meat and so on, right? So there's a need. But at the same time, you have to be careful, right? Because we actually know that there's only certain market in the 10 billion population, probably a very small portion, maybe 1% of it, will actually benefit or consume this product, right? Because I'm not, replacing anyone's, vision, but the way I look at it, right? So only so many people can actually afford it. Yeah, that's related to the second question. All right. So this is something I like to learn more about, for academics, for commercial industry people. It's like, what is the actual customer segment? Right? They're not buying this one because nutrition, right? You show animal production or animal protein consumption, the largest growth is poultry, is chicken. And that is the cheapest source of animal protein. Not talking about bugs or other things. But in terms of general agricultural, that is been growing, right? So that's satisfying, like large portion of global population. So that's a more commercial, social economic issue. Related to that, obviously, I'm chemical engineer. So I look at things, the question, I'm not sure if you benchmarked or is that what is the theoretical limit in terms of efficiency to say, right? Let's say $15 per pound. What is the target? Are you talking about 50 cents? Are you talking about $5? Just as chemical engineer, I always look at mass balance and energy balance. Black box, I don't care how you do it. Theoretically, there's a limit.
Yes.
So what is that limit? Do we have the economic analysis? And therefore, people can be informed to say, hey, this could be 50 cents a pound. In the future, everyone can afford it. $5, maybe only 10% people can afford it. So that's why I'm connecting two questions.
Yeah. No, that I think is an absolutely valid question. So I'll answer it in multiple different ways. One of the things is you have to think of these things again as trends and on a scale of things, right? What is today doesn't necessarily mean what will be tomorrow, 10 years, 20 years. Any new technology, any new food or otherwise started with a very, very small market share. Think of solar, right? Think of solar where we were 20 years ago. Think of electric vehicles, price and everything else. There's a lot of things that play a role. Some of it is science and technology for sure. Some of it is the community education and awareness piece, which is equally important. But the third piece is government policies. If you think of our current food system, many things are subsidized. And that is why we get, for example, meat at the price that we do here in the US. And so it's really a confluence of factors that helps bring down the price. And so really we do need efforts where, that's why I talked about really thinking about all stakeholders, because everybody is going to play a role in bringing this down, right? So that's sort of point one. The second point is, what you said is also right. And in fact, that is why I said earlier, these foods are going to be complementary to other foods that exist in the system. We are not going to replace 100% of our current foods, not even 50%. It's projected that if we can even be able to supply 5 or even ambitiously 10% of the food system with these foods, plant-based, cell-cultivated, and these together, we will still make a significant environmental impact. So sort of that is the, even in 2-3 decades out, maybe even that is the target. So even if we may be at 1% today, how do we try to get to between 5 and 10% in 2 decades? And that still needs all of these approaches. So that is sort of the other thing. The third piece is, you're absolutely right in that there's theoretical limits, there's limits just from basic physics and biology. Again, here, a lot of different things are going to happen. What I can tell you is companies have been able to bring down the price, some of them that will be in the market soon or have been on the market, to be under $10 a pound for some things, right? And so companies have actually done technological work to bring the price down compared to that 300,000 plus. And think about it, it happened in a decade. So if in a decade we can bring down the price by 2 orders of magnitude with very little investment in basic science and research, what we can do in the coming decade in bringing the price down. Whether it's going to come down to 50 cents a pound, I don't know. Certainly it's not going to happen in the next decade. However, currently looking at the trends and where things are moving and how much we have reduced the cost of inputs. So since you are a chemical engineer, and we have chemical engineers on our team, mass balance is very important, right? And so cell culture, for example, let me talk about that. When we talk about cultivated meat and cell culture, I mentioned medicine. And so oftentimes the culture media that is used to grow the cells, that can contribute anywhere from 50 to close to 100% of the costs of the eventual product. And that is because a lot of these culture media have been adopted from medicine, where we don't develop them thinking of cost. And what has happened over time is, if you look at some of the culture media that we have today, that started, the base media hasn't changed over 5, 6, 7 decades. Somebody did that for cancer cells in the 50s or 60s. And all we have done is try to replace one thing with another. There's so many things that go in that we even don't have a basic understanding of how things work. And so through research here, we are actually able to identify or work towards identifying what are the right metabolic pathways, what are actually the ingredients that you need versus you don't need. And the target from an economic analysis perspective was to bring the cost of that culture media to less than $1. So the studies that have been done over the last decade for techno-economic analysis, that is what they have pointed to achieve price parity, particularly for cultivated meat. And today there are several companies that have achieved that price point. So I think we are getting there. We are certainly there for some things. The last point I'll make is the market segments, because you brought that up, and that's also very valid. There is different approaches different companies are taking all over the world. Some companies, their strategy is to bring a product to the market to make the consumer comfortable with it. So they are not looking at bringing the price down to $5 a pound or whatever. Their philosophy is, once we show these products and people start feeling comfortable with it, technology development will happen, and eventually we can bring down the cost. So a month ago, I was in Singapore and I ate a cell-cultivated quail. Now, companies are identifying unique products because quail is something most people don't feel strongly one way or the other because we don't eat quail as much. Or there's foie gras that they make from quail. And they are selling it in restaurants at about equivalent to $20 a dish, 20 to 25. So it's expensive, but it's not $100,000, right? And there is a market for that. And so some of these companies, that's what they're targeting. So they said, we will pick some unique products where consumers don't necessarily, most of us don't even know what quail tastes like, right? So we will be more open to trying it, and eventually we can bring the market. So that is how some companies are approaching, but others are very clear. They're very focused on poultry. That's where they want to begin. In fact, one of the largest factories for cell cultivated meat specifically is being built in our backyard. Wilson, North Carolina, Believer Meats. They have a factory, and hopefully in the near future, they will start production of chicken products in there.
One sec, I'm gonna put in an online question first and then Stacy first, because you've already had a question. Can you give us an example of a research project at your center?
I can give you just a couple of quick examples. There's one project where we are working to reduce from a science perspective to understand the culture media, the example that I used, which is really a big price component. So we are really doing some fundamental research to understand what components play a role in it. And hopefully what we will learn will help bring the cost down. That is one. Second, very different example I'll give is looking at how we can use waste streams from current agriculture to extract protein and use in products. So globally, you know what the number one oil that is used, especially outside Europe? Palm.
Yeah.
Palm oil is very prevalent. And palm kernels, which are waste streams, actually have protein in them. So we have a project which we recently started where we are looking at how we can optimize processes to efficiently and in a cost-effective way extract protein from palm waste streams. So we can essentially create a new revenue stream plus new source of protein. That's another example. The last one I will give is around life cycle analysis and techno-economic analysis, since that came up. Not only are we applying these tools, but we are also creating some new tools that can give more accurate predictions and estimations.
So the last time I remember there being like a replacement for a nutrient group was Olestra. And that didn't go very well because it caused stomach problems. So how do you balance like getting the product out so that people become familiar with it, so that you can make more of it, so that you can bring the price down, with not going too fast, so that you don't have like the problems that came up with Olestra when they marketed that?
You are absolutely right. So safety is number one, food safety, and I'm really thankful to agencies like the FDA which exist because they really help control. And so, especially, and I'm referring mainly to the cell-based, but these certainly apply to the plant-based too. Is that on the plant-based, at least for soybeans and peas, we have decades of knowledge. For cell-based, it is new. So the process you cannot start a factory tomorrow and start selling the product. And so FDA and USDA together actually regulate some of these products that contain cell biomass. And they are learning as we go too, and they have rigorous processes in place. So getting these products approved to be on the market can take 2 to 3 to 4 years even. And so there is a process. At the same time, people are also doing more science on the nutrition side of things to again understand some of the benefits, because some of these plant sources, in addition to nutrients, there are also anti-nutrients that exist, including in the foods that we eat. And so while we talk about protein extraction, there's also people looking at how do you extract anti-nutrients from food so that you can separate those and then focus on the nutrition. So there's a lot of work going on that. And then some of it, I think, goes back to this being corporate responsibility. While we have measures in place, I think it is very important that product developers, companies don't try to rush to get these products out. So one of the things that happened with plant-based products, right, if you've tracked them, Impossible and beyond, right, they started in the early 2010s. Really, that market kept growing slowly. And during the pandemic, when all of us were home and we had time to think and do unique things, the sales went up because people wanted to try these things. Unfortunately, what happened was with that plant-based industry, suddenly because of that increase in market, so many startups started bringing products that were not fully developed, that honestly didn't taste good, didn't have the right texture, flavor, nothing. And when consumers tried those, they were like, these products are bad. And then the sales drop. Now, this does happen with any novel technologies where initially things peak, then they drop, but then they stabilize, and that's the point where we are. So one of the things when me, my co-director and others, we meet with entrepreneurs and startups, that's one of the things we try to highlight to them is I know your VCs, you have pressure to generate revenue, but don't rush into it, because in these novel technologies, if you put a wrong product out, it's going to destabilize that entire domain.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking is like, Alestra was FDA approved and it was sold, the WOW chips and everything were sold in stores. But it kind of soured like any kind of like artificial, like I think it soured like the whole like idea of it.
Yeah, no doubt. And so some of these companies, in fact, are the ones that I know I work with. They are minimizing the number of ingredients as much as possible, right? They have brought it down to where their chicken nugget likely has less ingredients than the regular chicken nugget that you buy. I think this is where, again, the consumer education part comes in. Just because these are made out of animal cells doesn't mean it's bad. It probably has more nutrients than. So it's a process.
We are almost out of time, but if you want to ask your.
Okay, just try quickly. You mentioned briefly about the environmental impact of things. So we know that a lot of current products have hidden costs to the environment or other costs like that. How do you foresee some of these methods that are going forward? Will they have those hidden costs, or will they be more beneficial as far as environmental costs go and other things like that?
So. You can tack onto that. I did wonder about water use.
Yes, absolutely. So that is where the whole concept of life cycle analysis comes in. Now, theoretical studies have shown that for many of these sustainable protein products, these alternatives, that their environmental benefit is lower than environmental footprint, or the benefits are more than the footprint of the current livestock production system. But it's not necessarily the same. So for some things, maybe the benefit is it's 10% better broadly. For some other products here, it may be 50-60% better. And also, when we look at that, we track it in different metrics. Greenhouse gases is one, but water consumption is another. And there's several factors, and we look at it again right from the source. So you can't just think of the factory. We actually even need to think of the impact when these crops are grown. So there is absolutely this kind of tools and analysis that keeps happening. And companies do that too, because they realize as well at the end of the day, if they are not, because that is in some sense a selling point, or the value that is coming to them. And so that, while you don't necessarily see it all the time, behind the scenes, that is always happening. That, as well as the economic analysis that he brought up. Anytime a new technology is developed, we are continuously looking at the techno-economics. These are projections, these are estimates, but they help guide where things need to go.
So there was one final online question I want to ask, just because they can't come up and ask you after. Are there any collaborations with hospitals to create medically tailored meals that are also culturally relevant for meals served at hospitals?
Great question. So right now we are not doing that at the Bezos Center, but I have a very good colleague at UNC Chapel Hill, Doug Fanstiel. He is actually starting to do some work around this, where it's not coming from a more environmental angle, but it's coming from a more health angle, where there's a segment of population that may not be able to eat meat, for example. In North Carolina, some of that is happening.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. If anybody wants to ask further questions, please go ahead. We're gonna. Yeah, I think that Jason.
It was a fat substitute used in chips. It was in potato chips, and it caused stomach problems and diarrhea.
Stomach and lower.
Yeah, stomach and lower.
Yeah, it was just kind of.
Fascinating